More sweet water.
Here we go. We are live streaming on YouTube. I'm waiting for it to come up in my browser so we can have 100% confirmation. But you see 3 of us here today. We will introduce our guest in just a minute. This is none of the above. Amy Peikoff, we have James Valliant, and then we have a guest all the way from China joining us today. And that is Robert Garmong. So thank you for joining us here today. If you can hang tight for just a second, guys, I'm going to drop the link various places, if that's fine with you.
Please.
Let me figure out where those places should be. Okay, people are... I counted on my notifications to tell me where to drop it, and that was not working very well. Let's see here. Here's one. And I'll just say we're live now. And we can also do that on different pages. We have a page for None of the Above on Facebook if you want to go ahead and check us out there. And I'm dropping the link there right now. And then also I still have my Don't Let It Go Unheard page, which was my flagship show. So we'll go ahead and drop the link there. And finally, follow me on Twitter, guys, if you don't already. Amy Peikoff on Twitter. Are you public on Twitter yet, James?
Oh, no. So distasteful to me as a format. I really have to say, as you know,
Okay.
I have a Twitter phobia almost. It's almost as if the format itself I object to. So I
would say Twitter is where I get most of the noise.
Right.
It has some nice features, but
Colin, it's so widely used by politicians and everybody. I really should be there, but I got to hold my nose and put on my, rubber gloves.
Okay, so I have dropped the links everywhere. Hopefully some people are joining us over here on YouTube. I see Stephanie over there in the chat. So people are filing in. Welcome to None of the Above. This is number 2. We'll call this number 2 of season 2. Is that fair enough, James?
Yes.
Yes. And we have joining us all the way from China. Where in China are you joining us from, Robert?
I am in the northeastern reaches of China, a city called Dalian, which is a small town for China. It's only about 3 to 4 million people. So roughly the size of Chicago, and it's no place anybody's ever heard of in the US.
Wow.
Wow, okay.
We have the good fortune here to be very far away from everything, which I normally curse when it's time to plan vacations and such. But at the moment, that happens to be just about the best protection you could have in China.
Right.
We locally, we're dealing with tens of thousands of cases of the coronavirus nationwide right now. Locally, we have about 17. So
okay.
Far away from all the nastiness.
Right.
Yes. Now, how far are you from the center, Wuhan?
We are at Wuhan. If you think in terms of the US, Wuhan is located right about where Tennessee is. And China is roughly the same size as the US. So it actually maps pretty well onto a US map.
Okay.
And so the center of the virus outbreak is in roughly Tennessee. And we are Cape Cod.
Okay.
So nowhere near.
Okay. And that has served you, you think, quite a bit. Yeah. So I've known you for a long time, Robert, and you had said that you thought you had some things that would be useful for the audience to know about not only things about the culture there that might contribute to the spread of a virus like this, but maybe also, and connected with that, an argument as to why maybe we should go ahead and call it the Wuhan coronavirus, which is what I actually put out there on a couple little teasers today as well. So I was going to let you just tell us, what's the situation there, and how do you think any cultural or perhaps some of the governmental measures have maybe contributed to it?
Hmm. Yeah, well, first of all, everybody wants to know right away, how bad is it? And it's obviously a moving target, but I just checked a moment ago. As of a couple of minutes ago, the WHO has 31,000 plus cases total worldwide. So this is a significantly larger outbreak than, for example, the Ebola worldwide, and significantly worse than SARS in terms of the number of cases. About 630 some deaths, maybe 640 by now. But one interesting piece of data for people who are interested in, is this going to take over the world? For 2 days in a row now, we've had a decrease day on day in the number of new cases.
Nice.
So that's the first sign that we would be looking for, that the thing is maybe abating. That's going down from 3.9 thousand new cases in a day to today it was 3.5 thousand new cases. That's still a lot of cases for a disease that's killing people.
Right.
So
now I had seen a headline that they were, sort of even closing down Wuhan even more. Could the decrease in the reporting of number of new cases be simply due to lack of knowledge because they're really doing a lockdown?
That is possible. And it's very difficult to know what to believe, of course, given that we are going through a very questionable government apparatus that has, let's say, crossing incentives. So they're not necessarily reporting the full truth. And that's one reason I say that particular number is not proof that we're out of the woods by any stretch. Even if we could rely on it, it's not the end of the thing, because it's obviously still increasing. But I would say, though, on the other hand, that they have moved a lot more equipment in. So, for example, for the first week of the really intense lockdown, they were dealing with, literally for the entire city, they were in the hundreds of test kits available to actually identify the people who truly had the virus. Now they're in the thousands every day. Okay. So I think the reporting actually has gotten better if we can trust what they do tell us.
Yeah, I just got word, James, because you're in California with me, by the way, that California now will have its own test cases as well. I mean, test kits. And so they
brought in at Miramar, they brought in for quarantine some more cases right here in San Diego just this morning.
That's right. And they no longer have to ship the test kits out to the CDC for them to do it. They've now authorized local hospitals to do their own testing. And so it should expedite the process.
Expedite it, yeah.
Help the containment.
But I honestly, at this point, I see no reason for Americans to be concerned. I mean, obviously vigilance is in order, but for reasons we'll probably discuss shortly, I think when this hits the US, I see no reason to think it's going to do there what it did in China or is doing in China.
Right. So far, only a dozen cases and no fatalities. So
that's right. And I don't see a reason to think that it's going to take hold in the US and become a real epidemic there. So
as far as I know, the only person-to-person spread we've seen in the U.S. were from people who were cohabitating.
Right.
So
an older couple, and the person-to-person contact. The gentleman continued to have close contact with his wife, while she was symptomatic.
Right. So. Yeah. So we will learn more as well, because now, unfortunately, there's the story of the 60 cases on a Japanese cruise ship.
Right.
And then there are also situations of, for instance, US and other countries flying people over from Wuhan, who are working there and then quarantining them and seen, if there are any cases among them, and if so, how it spread and things like that. So we will get a lot more objective evidence. And of course, we have to be trusting the incentives of our own people as well, right? Being over here doesn't necessarily make the incentives of our government officials perfect, because we're going to talk about other stories later that call those into question.
What do you mean,
Yes?
Amy? The United States government is perfect and
Yeah.
has nothing but our best interests always at heart.
Always,
Right.
always.
Well, I, in defense of your government, having lived under China's government for now 10 plus years, I can say that I used to think of freedom and the Constitution as the main things that set the US apart. And obviously those are the fundamentals, but I now have the opinion that in terms of the day-to-day functioning of government, the number one thing that sets the US apart from every other country in the world, and especially from China, is that lack of corruption. And of course, why do you have that lack of corruption? Fundamentally, it's the Constitution, freedom of the press, and so on. But I think in terms of the actual functioning of the US government compared to what I see here in China, for this sort of thing, we can bash on the US government all we want to, but it is worth at least taking a breath and saying they're at least a lot better than the alternative.
The old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant, may be a really good metaphor in this case.
In this case, it's more than a metaphor.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
That's right.
So what have you observed there about, China and Chinese culture, you think, that have contributed to the outbreak of this virus?
Well, there are a number of things that I think China is really a perfect storm, culturally and politically and economically. They all converge to make this really ground zero for sepsis and for new infections to arise, develop, and spread. Those three, because there are other places in the world where I'd say it's just as likely or maybe as likely that a new bug would arise, but it's never going to go anywhere. So China has a kind of unique set of circumstances that come down to the society to begin with. First of all, it is a society where for long generations, sanitation has been not a priority. And that's not contemporary China. That's going back reports back from the 19th century when the first Europeans were coming here. They were noticing things like spitting on the sidewalk as something that wouldn't be done in a major American or European city, but that is practically a spectator sport here. It's almost a form of swagger to bring up as much as you can and right in front of someone.
Teenage boys in California in the 70s, when I was a kid, took great pride in their ability to spit.
I was not thankfully raised around that. But it's almost ubiquitous in China, especially with the older generations. Younger generations, not so much. They've got more worldly experience. So
it's not just population density. There's actually cultural issues, you think, that are...
Absolutely. Washing hands is not universal. Public bathrooms almost never have soap in them, never have hot water, seldom have anything to dry your hands with. So it just in terms of the most basic things, and as we know, and I assume your viewers would be aware that the number one thing for avoiding infection is washing your hands frequently. The little face masks you see people wearing do virtually nothing to protect you from infection, because what happens is you touch something that's got the virus on it, and then the number one, something like 90% of viral infections do not come through the mouth or nose, they come here through the eyes. So washing your hands is the number one thing to avoid infections. and you can't do it here, including in restaurant bathrooms. So the people cleaning your food, handling your food, they don't have soap in their bathroom. The crowding, of course, is a real problem, but then also just sanitary practices. So, for example, children don't typically wear diapers out in public here. They go wherever they are. They wear these split crotch pants. You see grandma holding Junior with their legs apart, and they're doing it like dogs on the sidewalk. So just those cultural things. Now, again, those are changing. China is becoming part of the modern world. Just in the 10 years I've been here, which is not that long, I've seen very measurable changes. So hopefully in another 10 years, we won't be able to tell these horrible stories. But
and some of that comes down to economic development, right? I mean, just having
a lot of it
towels
does.
and warm water, right?
That's right. And also, China has a cultural pride that I think is a very important part of their development. Not just the economic development, but Chinese people really see themselves as important and their country as important. It's one of the things I love about this country. Really, other than the United States, I don't know another country that sees itself in that grand fashion as rightfully a world leader. And so when they see these news reports about people doing bad things in other countries, they're embarrassed by that. Right. And that, I think, has changed the way, especially the younger people, see themselves. Like, you know, there are reports about people going to Hong Kong or Taiwan or other countries and then engaging in those kinds of behaviors that are not tolerated there, and they get fined and written up in the newspapers. The Chinese do not like to see that. So economics is part of it, but then just the worldliness and their sense of pride in the world, I think, is an important part of their development. So those things are improving, but they've got a long way to go. And in particular, the way food is handled here is far from, let's just say it would not pass inspection.
Sure.
Restaurant health inspectors.
And interestingly, they've got regulations out the wazoo, but it doesn't make any difference because it's not part of the culture to be careful.
Would the virus have been spread by food, do you think?
Well, yes. As a matter of fact, it almost certainly did not originate in one of these wet markets, but it almost certainly began as an outbreak in one particular wet market that they've identified in Wuhan. Okay. And a wet market is an amazing thing. You got to see it once in your life, but clip your nose before you go.
Okay.
It's this huge, bustling, booming place full of little individual stands, often open air, maybe covered with tarpaulins or awnings or something. And they all kinds of produce and live animals are often sold there. Wow. Fish in particular are never bought dead. They're always bought live. But other animals sometimes as well, chickens and sometimes pigs and whatever. And in this particular one, now that's the kind that I've seen, and they are far from sanitary. So these are huge, unrefrigerated, open air places, not a refrigerator in sight. And so you go up to a counter where they've got pork or chicken or whatever, beef, lying out on the counter. They'll put little electric fans spinning and they hang these rags from them to keep the flies away. But that's the extent of the sanitation.
And they're doing the butchery right there?
They're doing the butchering right there. So you say, I want that one, and I want this part, this much. And they ask you how you want them to carve it up for you. It's really something.
See, it's kind of cool. I actually like markets that are kind of like that. But you say the sanitary standards are...
That's right. I mean, I love it too. The craziness of it to me is huge, but the sanitation is not there. and they're called wet markets for a reason. All the washings from those things are all over the floor, and they're being mixed, and they'll hose it down occasionally in a thin attempt to clean the place up, but it never dries. So whatever bacteria and viruses are there are in this wash, of this primordial ooze of various fluids. So it's a perfect place for illness to spread. And this particular one is from a part of China. The south of China is known for eating rather exotic things. People in the north of China say in southern China, they'll eat anything on four legs but the table, and anything that flies except an airplane. So,
well, there was a report that I heard just yesterday that looking at the genetics of the virus, they say they could trace it to bats.
Yeah, the coronaviruses in general seem to be kind of their natural home is a bat. Now, this one they think went through another animal vector, didn't come straight from the bat.
Right.
But it could have, and they make a bat soup that I've seen pictures of.
Okay, that was the question I think James was going towards, right?
Right.
Okay. I will not be trying bat soup. You know, I've been trying to get a little bit more adventurous. I tried some things I haven't tried before, but you have to draw a line. And
I would absolutely eat bat soup, but
more for Chinese you. Go right ahead.
Largely,
let us know what it's like.
They'll say things like, "See, it's their fault for eating such crazy things." No, it's not. It doesn't matter if you had bats that were raised on a farm, isolated from other animals in clean conditions, in just the same way we raise cows and pigs. There would be no reason for this sort of thing to happen.
Right,
it's because they're raised in unsanitary conditions. They're taken to unsanitary markets. They're killed and not refrigerated. Those sorts of conditions are the reasons for it. Now, in this particular case, they think that the latest I saw just a couple of hours ago is they think it passed from a bat through an anteater. There's a particular kind of anteater that's commonly used in Chinese medicine, and I guess is also eaten.
Wow.
Okay. Wow.
So from bat to anteater to human. And it almost certainly happened, the initial transmission happened elsewhere, because there's one case that has no connection to this wet market. I'm really getting into the details here, but the next cluster, the first big cluster that turned this into an outbreak, there were 7 patients that came in all at one time, and they all had connections to that same wet market.
Right.
So it almost certainly came in from somebody who was maybe a handler of these things, came in, maybe he was selling his produce on to the vendors, and he sold them a little extra goodie along with it. So that's how this thing got started. Now, once it gets started, then you've got the next few layers of the onion come in. And now, first of all, you've got that lack of sanitation among people who are sick. And here, China, of course, has the traditional Chinese medicine that all the young hippies are going to study these days. And that still has a major purchase. You know, there are herbs that do good things. I'm not knocking the entirety of traditional Chinese medicine, but as a theory, it still holds a big place in the common person's brain. So if you go to a doctor here, for example, with a normal garden variety disease, they'll give you some antibiotics and Western medicine, and they'll tell you, don't drink cold water. Or they'll tell you, don't eat anything spicy, because that's bringing in the traditional Chinese medicine part of it. Or if you get sick, most people will not say, oh, see, you should have stayed away from your wife who had the same cold last week. Most people will say, I keep telling you to stop drinking that ice water.
Wow. Okay.
So there still is not, they know about germs, but they don't know. It hasn't penetrated the core of most Chinese people's way of thinking about disease. And so again, more in the older generations and people who come from the countryside. And you also have to realize in China, the enormous growth of this country, everyone you see on the street in China, with very few exceptions, they're one generation or two generations away from the farm. So, and these farms are farms that were farmed in the same manner as they've been for 5,000 years.
Right.
So it's to China's enormous credit that we're dealing with that mixture of the modern and the ancient. And it actually impresses the heck out of me, but it causes problems. And so, for example, older people don't think anything about covering up when they sneeze or cough.
Mm.
You'll be standing on a crowded bus and an old woman will, and especially if you're a foreigner in this country, they're staring at you to begin with, and then boom, right in your face. So in terms of disease transmission, then you've got a huge population, you've got lack of sanitation, so it's very, very easy. And even just things like the way the Chinese eat. You don't get a plate of food in a restaurant. Everybody orders a dish, and then they set them in the middle of the table and you share with your chopsticks, which is a wonderful way to eat, but it's also a wonderful way to get whatever everybody else has. So that's kind of the next layer of why this would spread so easily. Then this happened to occur just in time for the Chinese New Year,
Right.
which is the largest mass migration in the world. It beats the Hajj, it beats everything. So
Really?
millions of people.
I wasn't aware of that. The Chinese New Year actually moves more people than pilgrimages to Mecca?
Absolutely.
Wow.
Because, and again, it's a factor of the economic boom, because all these factory towns, Shenzhen, which is the center of the economic boom since 1979, it was the first special economic zone announced by Deng Xiaoping in 79. At that time, it had 30,000 people. It was a sleepy little fishing village that happened to be located right directly opposite Hong Kong.
Wow.
And so that was chosen. They plopped down this SEZ there, and now it's a city of 11 million, 15 million, something like that.
Wow.
So everybody in Shenzhen comes from some village throughout China, all the way up to the north of China, all throughout the south of China. And so when it comes time for the New Year, and this is the Chinese New Year is for many people, it's their only holiday for the entire year. They have no vacation, or if they have it, they don't take it. So that 1 or 2 weeks is the only time that they travel. And not only is it the only opportunity, it's also just a very strong cultural drive to go home and see your village and see your parents. And home to a Chinese person is not where they happen to live. Home is that village that they grew up in. And even more, going back generations, I'll talk to people in Dalian and say, where are you from? And they'll say Shandong. I say, why Shandong? Did you move there from there? No, my grandfather moved from there in 1940 something.
Wow.
But they still consider Shandong to be Laojia, their old home. So they must go home. Not only that, for the average factory worker, it's very common that on a monthly basis, they get maybe a tiny stipend, the equivalent of $10, $15. They get their meals provided, they get a dormitory room, but they get paid their actual salary in one lump sum, often in cash, at the New Year. So they've got a pile of money that's a year's worth of their salary. And in many cases, now it's, again, all of this is changing and improving over time. Now they just do it on WeChat onto their phones, but still it's not so uncommon to have just a giant wad of cash. What do you do with that? You take it home to mom and dad on the farm. So there's even an economic imperative for many people to go home and do something that's their bank. So that means millions and millions of people going from these major cities. And Wuhan is, again, a city that nobody has ever heard of, but it's 11 million people. And it happens to be a transportation hub. It's like the Chicago of central China.
Oh, geez, the O'Hare of China, right? Ooh.
It's where all the railroads connect. It's where the high-speed rail, it's the major hub for the high-speed rail right in the middle of China. So it was really the worst possible place for a new bug to take place or to take hold.
So it's basically, now that they've shut it down, it's like shutting down O'Hare and the effect that that would have on all of the transportation through the United States.
That's right. But they've done more than that. Now they've shut down. Well, it radiates outward, but in some places, like in Wuhan right now, you cannot leave home. And in many places, they've now started issuing a household passport. It's just a scrap of paper with an official stamp on it. But every time you leave your apartment block, people live in these giant high-rise apartment complexes. To get out the front door, you have to have someone physically stamp that passport. And you are one person from your household is allowed to use that every other day. To go buy your groceries or whatever. So imagine 11 million people locked in
their homes, basically.
That's right. So it's the equivalent of a quarantine of the entire city.
And for how long do they plan to do this?
There's no announcement of an end date. And that's going to, I think, just depend on the circumstances. I think everyone expects it to last at least into March for the most severely affected areas. I don't see it happening because even if, let's say that the recent numbers are correct and this is actually the beginning of the thing breaking, it's still got a long way to go before that tail end.
Well, like you say, it's still new cases over 3,000. So
that's right. And it's got a 2-week incubating period. And one thing that we didn't talk about is the factors leading to why this really is a dangerous thing. A lot of people are saying, oh, who cares? It's not as bad as the flu, and so forget about it. Well, one key thing is that asymptomatic carriers can transmit this thing. So, so they're going to have to be very careful about when they open that city up in particular. Now, other parts of China, it doesn't seem to be spreading person to person as badly as it did in Wuhan. So I don't see them shutting all of China down for quite such a long time, but it's going to have a major impact for a long time.
Right. There's still a lot of travel restrictions, right?
That's right. So for example, even in Dalian, where things are much, much less stringent because we're so far away and we've had so few cases, even here, my wife's relatives had a gathering out on the farm, which is an hour outside of Dalian, and someone alerted the local police.
Oh, wow.
And came and chased them away because even within the same prefecture, if you're moving from one district to another, you have to register first and you have to be quarantined for 14 days. So obviously that didn't work with their little holiday gathering. So they all had to go back to Dalian. They didn't get fined or imprisoned or anything, but the police chased them away. Said, get out of here. You can't be here.
Wow.
So major travel restrictions. And that 14-day quarantine is going to be a huge economic impact because obviously all those migrant workers in every other city, even though the factories they're still scheduled to open on Monday, as far as I'm aware, that they extended the New Year's holiday by 1 extra week because of this outbreak. But that ends on Monday. So theoretically, they're supposed to be opening back up. But I have a friend who runs a very sizable codfish fillet factory, say that 5 times fast, just outside Dalian. And they did the numbers, and they expect to be at 60% of their workforce when they start up on Monday, because that's how many people, and they're in a fairly rural place, so a lot of their people would be coming from locally.
What kind of a hit do you think the Chinese economy is going to take from this?
I've seen estimates in the range of 5 to 10% slowdown. I wouldn't be surprised if it's worse than that, because the economy already has had a lot of headwinds in it. So, and I think they're basing that largely on the SARS numbers, and so much has changed in China since SARS. And this outbreak seems to be worse in every measure than SARS was. So I would not be surprised if it's worse than 10%. Now, when SARS happened, that effect was largely contained to 1 to 2 quarters, and they had a V-shaped recovery. So it was very, very swift. But that was right after they'd entered the WHO and WTO, and not WHO,
Yeah.
WTO. I got WHO on the brain right now. Right after they'd entered the WTO, and so it was really at a boom time for China. This is not a boom time for China, so I wouldn't be surprised if the impact is a lot. It may start recovering as quickly, but I don't think it's going to recover with the same velocity as it did last time.
Right, that V-shaped. Right.
That's right. I think it's going to be a much longer growth pattern. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's going to be big, and the knock-on effects are already huge in related economies. Hyundai just shut down production in their South Korean factories because their supply chain depends on China. Nissan just announced that they're going to have to cut back on their production. Of course, electronics are really heavily concentrated in southern China around Shenzhen. And that's one of the heaviest hit areas, because Wuhan to Shenzhen is a very common pattern of travel for business people mainly. So there's no way to predict well right now, but I think that the effect on the world economy is going to be very significant. Australia has already been suffering because they're heavily intertwined with the Chinese economy. Tourism, of course, in all of Southeast Asia is dead. You can go to the famous shrines in Thailand, the mountains of Thailand, where normally you just can't even get in. Right. And so now you've got it to yourself.
I've been trying to get some news. And one thing I find frustrating here in the United States is nobody is giving you a headline or anything easily accessible that says X number of new cases today, or there are no new cases, or whatever the little piece of information that you would like, you can't get it. So if you go on the Twitter feeds of these, local governmental agencies here, it'll be, go to such and such panel discussion on the latest about give us a tweet. You are a public health agency. You are on Twitter. Give us a tweet that says today's update is whatever it is.
So many cases and a new case here.
No new cases today, or whatever it is.
The new case is.
But instead, they're trying to stir up. You click. It's like they're giving you clickbait. You are a government agency. You are not supposed to traffic in clickbait. Anyway, so that's my venting. But I'm also trying to look at headlines, and newspapers are not giving us nice headlines either.
How can I send? I'm not terribly familiar with Zoom, but can I send you a link in a chat somewhere, or?
Probably, yeah. Go ahead and try and do that.
I'm not sure.
If you have, what are you keeping track of? Where are you getting your updates?
Right now, I'm using the WHO, and it's a long. What annoys me is that they don't have nice, easily remembered URLs to type in, but. There is one. WHO has a dashboard that's called Novel Coronavirus Situation as of 7 February 2020, 1600 CET. And that's very helpful. It gives you the worldwide breakdown, tells you the increase of cases each day, tells you the deaths, tells you the number of countries. It does not tell you the recovery, however. And now Johns Hopkins has one that also gives you the recoveries.
Maybe that's where we need to be going, right?
Right.
And maybe Johns Hopkins has a Twitter feed that actually is supposed, I mean, this is what you would think is the beauty of Twitter. It should be the beauty of Twitter, is that you can get the gist of something in a concise manner because they have the character limit. And you'd think that somebody who is concerned to convey information, but no,
A worldwide notice board, you know, that cork board that there was with the notices you can pin up. That was really that someone, you know, the metaphor someone once gave Twitter. Unfortunately, more like a yelling match.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm not a Twitter person. I get on there occasionally, but I don't think about it as a place to go. So I'm going to send you a link in Facebook because that's the only place I know that to send it to you. Sorry for my Zoom ignorance.
That's okay.
But
no problem.
Oh,
and then
now
I can
my
take a look
VPN
at
is
it.
being slow. Anyway, I'll leave that churning in the background and send it to you as soon as I can.
But thank you. That sounds helpful.
Yeah. So maybe if I search John Hopkins coronavirus on Twitter, I will get something very.
Meanwhile, I've just sent you the link to the WHO one.
Okay. Oh, all kinds of weird stuff. The top hits, the latest hits.
When I search on Johns Hopkins.
Okay, here's the live dashboard on Johns Hopkins.
Okay.
So that's interesting. They have an actual live dashboard. And MetaPage.
WHO has the same one, and the numbers are always the same. So
okay.
6 and 1/2 done.
So that might be the place that we want to look at. It is going to be interesting to see in the quarantines what happens. What do you think, by the way? I mean, you know, we've sort of been talking about how draconian the measures are there in Wuhan, but what would you do at this point in terms of handling it, either there or abroad? And I mean, do you think, yes, if they've evacuated people, that it is right to quarantine them for the 14 days and et cetera?
If I were the U.S. State Department making a decision on that sort of issue, first of all, I think it was foolish to evacuate everyone from Wuhan. By the time they got around to evacuating people, it was the most dangerous thing they could have done. The better thing would have been to shelter in place, because if you've already got an epidemic that's spreading around like that, and you don't have a pristine way to get from your door to a secure airport, onto a scrubbed plane, and back to the US, it's a 9-10 hour flight to LA from anywhere in China, and that's the closest airport. So you're dealing with being stuck in a tin can with recirculated air with 100 or 200 of your closest friends.
Okay, what I understand though is the air filters on the airplanes do filter out quite a lot. Is that not your understanding?
All I know is when I take a plane, it's 50-50. I'm going to end up with a cold.
I agree. The times that I normally don't get colds, you know, transmittable diseases, except when I'm traveling on an airplane. It's like after I'm done with my air travel, that's when I'll get the runny nose and the sniffles. The air filters may be great, but you're still in a relatively, you know, close quarters with other people.
You're going to be getting something on you before it gets to the filter to be scrubbed. And also now this particular virus, and I talk about the recirculated air. Actually, that's a little misleading on my part, because this one isn't really spread by airborne means as much as it is through droplets.
Okay.
So it's not going to be going up into the air conditioning system and then recirculating through the airplane. It's getting coughed out or sneezed out or breathed out, and that's actually that's right. That's actually a benefit of this particular virus, such that it's got about a 6-foot range. So when you sneeze, those particles will last in the air about 6 feet, and then they hit the ground. And when they hit a surface, the last I heard, and I don't think it's certain yet, but because they don't know a lot about this one, but last estimate I heard was they last about 15 minutes.
Okay.
So that's not nearly as transmissible as a lot of other viruses.
Yeah, that's not bad. Sometimes they last for days on surfaces, right?
That's right. So, and this is another reason I say don't stick people on an airplane. Let them stay home and wash their hands. You know, if you have 200 people trying to wash their hands every time they need to scratch their eyes, that airplane bathroom is not going to hold up over a 9-hour flight. So first of all, I think that was the huge mistake to begin with. It was a panic move. And I think it added to the panic about this whole thing. So I think it was a mistake to begin with. Once you've done it, I do think quarantine is in order because you've just put them through. And, you know, I obviously am not someone to be in favor of government infringing on your rights of movement and so on, but this is a legitimate threat. So it's been identified as enough of a threat to pull you out of China. It should be enough of a threat that we're not going to release you into the general public. Right. So I do think that was in order, and I don't have any quibbles with that. And as far as now, people always want to know about the Chinese reaction. And on my various social media that I do use, I seem to have two binary opposite groups. One group says the Chinese government are hiding all the data. This is much, much worse than they're letting on. The other group is saying the Chinese government is draconian and this is a terrible violation of rights and they should have freedom of movement. Obviously, those two cannot be correct.
Right.
My view tends to be, given what we know about this virus, and especially what we didn't know when it first started, that the quarantine, at least in Wuhan, was probably the right move. Because this could have been worse than I think it is. And I still don't know with certainty that it's not so horrible, and it could still be that the conspiracy theories are correct and it's much more lethal than they're saying and much more transmissible than they're saying. I just don't see the evidence for that.
What about the doctor who was in effect a whistleblower and then ended up dying from the virus? What does that say, you know, about the severity of it? I mean, did he have pre-existing health conditions that you know of that made him more at risk, or?
No, he did not. And he was a young man. He was in his 30s. So there was no good reason for him to have gotten it, except that he had a cluster of 7 cases, I think it was, all at the same time before anybody knew what this was. They thought it was just a regular flu. So he wasn't taking extraordinary precautions. And when he realized that it was a coronavirus, originally he thought it was SARS again, which is, SARS is considerably more lethal than this one is, as far as we know. So he immediately started taking those precautions, but it was already too late. And what we do seem to see about this one, and the reason I think it's a moderate risk and not an extreme risk, is that in cases where it's not easily transmissible, but in cases where you are surrounded by the virus, it's not hard to catch. It's not like a hepatitis where you have to have blood-to-blood contact. It does spread person to person through droplets. So that we know, but the transmissibility of this one seems to be higher than the flu, but significantly lower than what are some of the really nasty ones? Like a measles, where it lasts for hours and hours and spreads for 100 yards or something like that.
Right. Nothing
like those things.
Okay.
So now his case is a really tragic one, and when he died last night, it sparked a huge outcry on the Chinese internet. People, he's become a real hero to the Chinese, and rightly so. I think he was he wasn't any more of a hero than frontline doctors just are. He had people who were very sick, and he took care of them knowing that there's some risk that it could be this. And in China, it's more than just the risk of becoming infected himself. It's also the political risk, because he posted on just a private group of 7 doctors who had been classmates and friends in medical school. He said, be on the lookout because I've got SARS. And not I've got it, but I'm treating SARS patients.
Right.
And foolishly, his friends then retweeted or WeChatted that, and soon it went viral, so to speak, on the Chinese internet. And he knew immediately, as soon as he saw that his friends had spread this on, that he was going to get in trouble. And sure enough, the knock came on his door. They hadn't blurred out his name or anything, so they didn't even attempt to hide his identity. And he was detained and questioned and relieved of his duties for a period of time at the hospital. And he was not officially charged with a crime, but it's not pleasant to be questioned by the Chinese police. And I believe the entire group of 7 was similarly questioned and challenged for the crime of reporting on disease. So for doctors in this country who are in those positions, it's not just the disease risk, but it's also the political risk that they bear.
Right. Wow. Really,
so
really
it was
sad.
a truly sad passing. And now, in typical, true to form, it couldn't even be a smooth death, so to speak, because the people at the hospital identified his death at 9:30 last night, and it was on the Chinese internet. It was on WeChat. Hospital employees were saying he has died. The hospital then very quickly came back and said, no, he hasn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And supposedly he was then put on some sort of extreme life support where they could recirculate the blood bypassing the lungs, which had died basically. And they kept him alive until 1:30 in the morning, when they announced that he had died. They finally admitted it. And the thought is that they wanted to wait until everybody was asleep so that the news would not hit all at once. And then even that message was taken down, and now they're claiming that he is still alive and on life support, but no one believes that part. So, the guy died at 9:30, was kept alive until it was a more politically convenient time to announce his death, and then we can assume he died at completely died at 1:30, finished dying at 1:30. So that shows you the political conditions that have made this outbreak even worse than it would have had to be. And now here, going back to the question of what about the quarantines, and are they a good thing and are they a bad thing, and is it overreaction and so on? There's no way to know that because of the opaque government system. But now people, the Chinese government and its apologists and even the WHO have said, see, this is a shining example of the Chinese political system. You know, you could never quarantine Chicago the way that you can Wuhan, right? Americans just wouldn't tolerate it. We wouldn't have the infrastructure for it. We wouldn't have the surveillance drones to watch everybody, and so on. Right. And okay, fine. Let's grant that, and let's say that if there's a major outbreak of let's say this disease was as lethal as Ebola, which is in the 50% range, and as easily spread as measles, which, as far as I know, is a theoretical possibility, then that would wipe out a huge percentage of the population, and China would be in a much better position to deal with it than the US is. However, when the thing was just getting started to begin with, it would have been highly controllable. When those first 7 cases came in, and leaving aside all the conditions that led to their development in the first place,
right,
and leaving aside the fact that these wet markets exist and they are a source of contagion, a known source of contagion. Leaving all that to the side, when you have the first 7 cases in your hands, and you could and should quarantine them, and I know I'll get flack for saying that, but I don't care. Quarantine is perfectly legitimate when you've got somebody who's carrying a deadly disease. And at that point, they assumed it was SARS, which is a highly deadly disease. So at that point, they could have nipped this thing in the bud, but the messenger got squashed rather than whoever was in charge of their local health system could have taken that information, said, thank you, let's swing all of our resources into action. And then I would be happily working my day job, and we wouldn't be talking about factories starting up with 60%, 40% vacancies. And all of this would have been avoided. If an equivalent thing had happened in the US, there would have been 7 cases, and there would have been a horrible press for a day. And, the New York Times would have had exposés on our terrible health system, and it would be over, or more likely than not. So,
okay. So someone's commenting here on YouTube. He says the fact that China can deal with the zombie apocalypse better than a free nation does not justify tyranny. And I know that Robert is exactly on board with that. He was just saying it as a data point, that it just happens to be the case that if there was this, then, in that particular kind of case, but, we don't kind of structure our day-to-day lives, our morality, our government based on what we call lifeboat scenarios and ethics, right? Robert, you know them well.
Absolutely.
That, on the existence of some virus like this. Now, it could be also that in the United States, where we have the hand washing culture and things like that, that maybe if there was something really, truly as horrible as that, they would comply and stay in. So we could speculate. But yeah, China has the infrastructure to enforce a draconian quarantine, is all he said. He didn't say that overall he's in favor of China's system over US system, right?
Thank you for not making me say anything against the Chinese system. Since YouTube is heavily blocked in China, but somehow the Chinese government can get to it just fine.
I'm sure. I'm
Yes.
sure. I'm sure that's the case.
In fact, they use YouTube and Twitter, both of which are blocked. And you can follow the Chinese government's Twitter account, which I just find hilarious.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or the
So
various
what time is it there right now, by the way, Robert?
It is 4 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, wow. So we are coming to the top of the hour here. And I guess you said you can't really work your day job right now.
That's right. We have a little extended holiday, so I have a little more time with my son and some time to finally do some of that writing I've been saying I wanted to do. So,
okay.
Well,
And I was going to say, you
unforeseen
could
benefit there.
I was going to say, now you could still catch up on your sleep a little, but I guess that depends then on your son.
Yeah, today should be a good day because he didn't want to go to sleep last night. So I'll have a few hours anyway.
Okay. Well, we thank you for joining us, and we're going to, you could stay and watch us on YouTube while we talk about just politics and our usual fare. But this has been a treat to, not only just get kind of informed on the ground commentary on this issue, but all the way from across the world. So thanks to YouTube for offering the technology, of course. Yes.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Don't worry. It's not going to be the zombie apocalypse. It didn't have to be the zombie apocalypse in China. And even if it does start to spread person to person on a greater, to a greater degree in the US, it's not going to become something that none of your viewers need to worry about missing work or losing a loved one due to this disease. Yeah. So that's my bottom line takeaway.
Thank you, Robert, very much.
Well, thanks so much. And stay safe, and yeah, go do that writing.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I know it well. I know it well. Good.
Bye.
Okay, I think we are switching over. Okay, so now you and I should end up being side by side, and I don't know why we are not.
Well, that was really quite a treat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, no, here we are. Now we're
very
back on.
informative. My gosh.
Let's see, gallery view. This is so strange. Why are we this way? I'm looking at, oh wait, okay. I see us on YouTube and we're fine. So, okay, so everybody,
So
if you guys are wondering at my puzzlement, right? On YouTube, we look just normal, like always.
Right.
And on Zoom here, we're looking at each other up and down, which is, it's very straight. We're vertical on Zoom and we're horizontal on YouTube. Okay, I'm fine. I'm good. I can deal. I can fly with this. So we have a couple other topics we talked about, James, that we wanted to get to today. And one happens to be in my realm of interest, and another happens to be in your realm of interest. And I mean, I think mine is overlapping with yours and vice versa as well, but you know, in terms of specialties. So the first that I've got, and the clearest presentation that I've been able to see of this so far is from EFF, Electronic Freedom Foundation. And it's about something they're calling the Blumenthal Proposal, even though, you know, Lindsey Graham is getting the headlines, I think, more on this. So Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal are quietly circulating a serious threat to your free speech and security online. Their proposal would give the Attorney General the power to do this. Are you ready? Unilaterally write new rules for how online platforms and services must operate in order to rely on Section 230. And Section 230 is, of course, this controversial statute that supposedly grants to platforms like Facebook, YouTube, et cetera, a you know, sort of immunity from litigation.
Well, in the 1990s,
supposedly they wouldn't have otherwise. Yeah.
Right. In the 1990s, they passed this law, in effect, saying that internet providers weren't publishers; they were merely platforms, and so basically couldn't be held liable for at least most of what people post on their platforms.
Right. Right. Now, obviously, if they become aware of something on their platform,
right,
then a duty would arise to do something about it if it's of a criminal nature or of a rights violating nature. But anyway, Section 230, they say that it was necessary for that to happen, for them to have this immunity.
So they're trying to change the rules and let the Attorney General change the rules willy-nilly as he sees fit.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in particular, what they plan to do, I think, with the Attorney General's power in this regard is to make it that the platforms have to give equal time to conservative speech, or what, you know, and what the Attorney General would do with this power, in short, depends on who's in office and what the agenda is, right?
That is terrifying.
And
well, you know, you could imagine them coming up with something like television had for so long, a fairness doctrine or something. You've got to give equal time, and if you do one, you do the other, and you can't have, you know, partisan party stuff. Otherwise, you have to give equal time, and, you know, a fairness doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And in other words, censorship, content, political censorship.
See, and I mean, that's the perversity of using the term censorship when we're talking about what social media does with its codes of conduct, or, you know, terms of service, whatever they call it.
That's not censorship, right?
That is not censorship. And if you start calling it censorship, then you're going to give fuel to those who are trying now to impose actual censorship.
Precisely.
So they're calling it, you know, apparently this is just being distinction. This proposed legislation is just being quietly floated in the Senate for now, but it's been broken and leaked, which is great. The write-up that Cato had was more complicated, in my view, to understand exactly what it was. I mean, here they're very simply saying the Attorney General unilaterally gets to change the rules about how they have to operate in order to allow, you know, or to avail themselves of Section 230. And it says, they say the Attorney General could use this power to force tech companies to undermine our secure and private communications. Word is that they're going to go after encryption. They're not going to be allowed to give us encrypted communications and at the same time keep Section 230 immunity.
It's really a threat then. They're using this to threaten them, to give them a back door into everyone's privacy.
Right.
Nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
Exactly.
Nice.
So in the Cato write-up, they were saying that there's been a lot of discussion that this is necessary to crack down on child pornography. And Cato had made the point that, just in their blog, they had said that there are existing laws on the books that if a platform does become aware of any of this, they're already under a duty to report, et cetera.
Of course.
But encryption in general, right? So encryption, it could be used to do some bad stuff, right? Encryption could be used by people who are plotting some ISIS terrorist attack. It could be used by child pornographers. What do you think, Jim? I mean, let's get the broader question. Encryption should be legal, yes or no?
I think it should be legal.
So it should be legal for Apple, for Facebook, for all of these tech companies to offer you encrypted communications.
Right. I can devise ways of communicating with you that are absolutely secure, right? What is that Da Vinci Code device, the cryptex, right?
Okay.
They have that cryptex thing, right? And any attempt to break into it will destroy the intercommunication. And unless you know the specific code, there's only one way to access it. So would we say that a cryptex should be made illegal? Now, there could be evidence of a crime. There could be evidence of terrorism inside that cryptex.
Right.
And unless the government has a right to do that, you shouldn't be able to manufacture that device without allowing the government to have some backdoor into it.
That's what they're saying.
Right. See,
that's what they're saying. And I don't buy that at all, right?
Right, exactly.
Now, okay.
You're like saying you can't have a private code. You and I could develop a private language between ourselves.
Right.
Right? No one could be as hard to decipher as the hieroglyphs were. And what they're saying is that that would be illegal. The equivalent would be illegal because you have a secret language. You have to let us know how to decode that secret language, or you and Amy can't have a secret language that you share. I don't buy that.
Yeah. Now,
I just don't buy it as a principle.
So here's the thing. If we say that we want to continue to allow tech companies to offer encrypted communications, are we some kind of anarchists or what? I mean, what are we actually saying then? Are we saying law enforcement can never access any data that's part of an encrypted communication?
Oh, no. I would say that if law enforcement has probable cause to believe that there's information anywhere, that there's evidence of a crime, that they have a right to get a warrant. Yes. And to do whatever they want, to use whatever force is necessary to get it. In other words, it's not their job to protect your privacy when they know, or they have good reason to believe that there's evidence of a crime there. Your protections were your business and shouldn't be criminal if you took steps to make something private. On the other hand, they can take whatever steps are necessary to get that evidence. If they come across a cell phone that they can't get into, right? Oh, we believe there's information, the terrorist has information in the cell phone. They can take whatever steps they want to get in there themselves.
Well, okay, but so let's be clear about whatever steps they want, right? Because what we're talking about, if some people doubt whether the tech companies are really giving this to us or not, but it seems that government and law enforcement are agitated enough about it that is what we have. It's called end-to-end encryption. So if I send a message through some encrypted channel using my phone to your phone, then the only people who are able to read the communication, know the content of the communication, are supposedly you and I. The provider of the service does not have access to the communication if it's been...
At least that's what they tell us. But
yes, if this technology has been set up properly, right?
Right.
And so then what would the government have to do if they want to get their access to it? They have to present a warrant to either you or me, right?
Right.
So if there is, they can get at it if they can present a warrant to either the subject of the communication or somebody to whom he's entrusted.
Right. Right.
communication, right?
Right. Right.
I mean, it's, the subject of the investigation.
But
right?
let's assume now that for some reason they can't, that the other party isn't available, that both parties maybe don't have access to it anymore. That's too bad. At the end of the day, I'm willing to say, as a matter of policy, that hiding communications, securing communications, is going to do that. Sometimes there's going to be communications that simply cannot be accessed by law enforcement. Hard swallow, but that's the way it is.
Right. And that's the thing. And that is what having a right to be secure in your person's, houses, papers, and effects without a warrant, right? No, not
Right.
subject to search and seizure, right? Except
Right.
there's a warrant based on probable cause, particular suspicion. That's what it means. And it just so happens that because we have now shared so much information with third parties as part of technological advancement, that the government has had the luxury to be lazy and avoid any confrontation when they want to get evidence about us, and they'll go instead to these third parties.
Right. They want the easy way.
Yeah.
Now they want the wholesale way.
Now,
Right.
the tech companies have responded, maybe because they also don't want to have the responsibility all the time of wading through all these requests, right? Of saying, okay, look, we can just offer people end-to-end encryption, and then we're not even privy to these investigations. We don't have to make all those dicey decisions about what we give over in the, when a subpoena is presented to us.
Right.
But, the government has made it such that they don't have to present a warrant. Why? Because they have this third-party doctrine that I've been fighting against. Go to legalizeprivacy.org, right? The law has been saying for decades that if you share information with a third party, government can get access to it without a warrant. They just bring a subpoena,
just
and then
a subpoena.
poor Apple.
There may not even be a filed criminal case yet. Just a government subpoena from Congress or a grand jury. That's
Even administrative subpoenas.
Even administrative.
Now,
exactly. So, they don't even need to have filed a criminal case.
Right. And so poor Apple, for example, would be sifting through these all day, but then they say, okay, well, privacy is something that our consumers want, especially post Snowden. Privacy is something that will make our jobs easier. If we have access to less data, then we have less data that we have to say, well, do we give it over? Do we not give it over, et cetera, right? So in this legal climate, particularly, this is a wonderful thing because we are sharing less of our private communications with third parties. And so what happens? Someone like a Lindsey Graham, oh, I don't like it. People are talking and it's private and law enforcement can't get at it. And so they're going to use, child pornography as the reason to end encryption for everybody.
And neither side likes, both sides appear to want political censorship as well. Even ignoring the law enforcement excuses they give, right. I really do think both sides are really irritated at social media platforms and their political influence. They don't like the free-for-all that's going on in Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and generally online.
Freedom is so messy, and they hate that.
Yeah.
Even here in the United States, which is strange, right? We just heard about, is there a difference between United States system and China? But you wonder how big the differences are going to be if some of these politicians start having their way, right?
Right. Well, yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like I don't get frustrated at bad political content and bias in different media outlets, but that's how I treat it. I treat the, Facebook's editorial attitude as I would say ABC. I know we don't call them publishers, we call them platforms, but still I treat it very much the same as I did, as I do a television network. Fox is conservative, CNN and MSNBC are not. The networks tend to provide, a uniform left of center bias. Accept that, move along. That's their outlet. Understanding that, I can say, gee, MSNBC is awfully biased or Fox is awfully biased, and can get frustrated at both. And I often do get frustrated at either or both. Sure. But that's their platform.
Right. And unless or until there are more barriers to entry created, people should just dive in and
Right.
be competitors. I mean,
Right.
that's really the solution to
Make
that
your
problem.
own platform.
But yeah, so to be clear, encryption I think should remain legal. In the Cato blog piece, they mentioned Senator Ted Cruz as one of the people who is anti-big tech, anti-encryption, going after them for, quote, censorship, etc. And it's
I was just
really
thinking of him.
disappointing.
Yes.
It is really
Yeah.
disappointing. No, you know, I saw there was just a tweet from Cruz the other day, and he's on some mode of public transportation, and he's you know, gloating about the acquittal of Trump. You know, whether you think it's good or not, just sitting there gloating about it is kind of not a great spectacle. So, you know, I mean, and I'm just commenting how much he's changed from the person who I thought he was when he first got onto the floor of the Senate doing the filibuster against Obamacare.
Holly thinks something has happened in his personal life. I hate to speculate like this, but she has this theory about beards.
No, the beard
dudes,
thing.
She says dudes who grow beards are hiding something.
Okay, but I think maybe he's just hiding because he's turned so pro-Trump.
Right.
Just kind of party line and bigger government sympathetic in some of these measures.
He has become a major Trump cheerleader.
And that's just sad. And if I
mean,
was
they
him,
started
I'd have a hard time looking at that shaven face in the mirror, you know?
Well, they started out such hostile opponents at the beginning. I mean, Cruz was really the main threat for Trump during the Republican primaries 4 years ago. And wow, they really have made it all up, and they are working hand in glove now, just real buddies.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I have to say that State of the Union spectacle and then the reactions back and forth. Whoa, what political theater we had this week.
You know, I missed most of it, but of course I saw the tearing of
Nancy,
and it was pre-torn apparently.
She did.
They
actually caught her pre-tearing it. Well, apparently that's the copies of the speech of the State of the Union that the president gives to the vice president and the Speaker of the House, the head of each of the two chambers of Congress, are part of the official record. So she actually destroyed something that is made part of the official, you know, the president is under
I would say that the official record includes the fact that it was torn by her.
Okay.
So as long as she turns it over in torn form.
I can understand making a huge protest about Trump. I'm not sure that the way that she did it was appropriate.
Oh, sure. No, but I'm saying it can still be appropriate is one thing, but then you say, okay, she's got a legal duty to keep it or whatever. I'd say, let's just say that is part of the record. The fact that she childishly tore up the speech.
Does she have a role in making a comment at that point? You see, the president delivers to Congress a State of the Union speech. We don't have
but whether she has a role, or not, it's still part of the public record. She doesn't have a proper role, but it's still part of the record.
She got so upset she tore it. But it was a planned, premeditated thing, obviously, because she pre-tore to some degree. Maybe it was during the speech.
Maybe she was going to tear it in the beginning, and she's like, "Oh wait, maybe I'll do it at the end on camera for real extra effect." She might have stopped herself.
Yeah, I watched the whole speech, and honestly, the way it seemed to me is that she was just getting more and more angry and frustrated. And you know, a lot of what Trump says, I don't like. But he's stealing a lot of Democrat thunder, and it almost seemed as though the more Democrat thunder he stole, you know, we'll always protect pre-existing conditions, and we're going to plant 1 trillion trees or whatever, right? And so as he's stealing her, we'll regulate drug prices, and we'll build more infrastructure. And, you know, you could tell those are lies, and you could tell she was getting all frustrated. They both, in my view, acted somewhat unprofessionally in that. She even much worse even than Trump. So as much as I don't like Trump, my God, she just made the State of the Union you know, maybe we should go back to the way Jefferson did it, just deliver a written thing to Congress. It was only Woodrow Wilson about 100 years ago who started giving speeches live to Congress. And it was only Lyndon Johnson who really turned it into a big television production. So
when it was possible to do that. Yeah.
exactly. And maybe we shouldn't have it at all. Maybe it's just ridiculous political theater in any case. But if you're going to have that kind of a ceremony, if you're going to invite the president to the House chamber, which she did, she skipped it's my privilege and a high privilege and honor to give you the president. She skipped all that. And the president, she reached her hand out to shake his head. The president didn't shake her hand. He may not have noticed it. He didn't shake the vice president's hand either. But there was that bad image of her reaching the hand out and him not responding. And so you could see, one of the funnier comments is he had his back to her well, that's the way the president speaks. He has his back to the vice president and the speaker. But you could tell she was getting more and more frustrated as the speech went on. So she may have had it planned, but you could tell she was not a happy camper. And frankly, the whole thing just came off as extremely childish, petulant, unprofessional. I don't care how much you disagree. I don't care if you think the whole thing was a pile of lies. Was that the right way to show it?
Yeah, not a professional manner at all.
No.
But Robert agrees over with me in the chat room over here on YouTube that it's still just part of the official record with her commentary, the tearing and everything. It's just ridiculous. Just going back one moment to again this Graham and Blumenthal proposal, the so-called Earn It Act. Again, insofar as this is going to be used to tell platforms that they cannot offer end-to-end encryption, it appears to present a serious risk of being used in that fashion by our Attorney General. We do want to watch this. We do want to fight it. And when I decide what the appropriate way is to do something about this, I'm going to, again, go to legalizeprivacy.org, see the 2 projects that I've done in the past, and you can see why this is right up my alley. I've spoken a number of times on my show and different shows saying that I believe a tech company is perfectly, in its right, and we have the right to purchase a product that is completely 100% encrypted that only we can get into, just like our houses to which we alone have a key in the old days. And Supreme Court has noted in some of its opinions saying, yes, telephones these days often carry more personal information about us than our homes do. And of course, the encrypted communications that are accessed often via our phones are similar as well.
Oh yeah, the most private information.
Let's make the government return to the day that it actually had to confront the subject of investigation. Government has gotten lazy. It's gotten entitled. Talk about entitlements. Government thinks that it is entitled to avoid confrontation with the subject of investigation in any case that it wants. It can just go to the third party with whom you've supposedly shared the information and grab it. And it doesn't like when the tech companies actually figure out how, as civilization progresses, to restore us again to more privacy.
Right.
They're not happy with it. And so they're using child pornography as an excuse.
Look at the title of the thing, Earn It. Tells you everything you need to know about their sense of entitlement.
This is maybe another discussion for another day, but I don't know that in Section 230, by quote, declaring them to be this, that they were giving them anything to which they weren't entitled. It's not a special favor.
No.
It is a recognition that there is actually a distinction, a viable distinction between a platform in which individuals publish their stuff versus, say, New York Times, which you have editors and they decide both what goes in and in what form and the headlines and everything, right?
Yeah, once you create the rules, though, you sort of create what it is. And we have now decades of it being treated that way. And to change the rules, or to have the Attorney General change the rules on a case-by-case basis in an ad hoc way,
But that's just the next step, you see, Jim, right? Because the way that people have been construing Section 230, it's as if government has granted special immunity to these platforms, and it's something that they don't deserve. And in my view, all the that statute does, and all any proper statute really does, is recognize rights and declare clearly and unequivocally, kind of what they are, because in some cases things get technical and maybe things need to be declared. But I don't think that Facebook has gotten some special immunity by being declared not to be a publisher. And that's where I disagree with most conservatives.
You're correct. The rule is actually better acknowledging what Facebook and internet social media really are vis-a-vis a magazine or a newspaper. So I agree with you. It's a better way of handling it because the regulation actually recognizes the reality better. So I agree with you. I'm in favor of it. But when you create the rule itself, you've actually created what it is. Back in the 90s when they passed that rule, they're saying, yes, by acknowledging that's what the reality is, they've actually helped further create it, and they've established, in my view, a system in which that is the case. And so to change the rules is in itself a violation of rights. Because,
there's that too, right? Because there's been a reliance interest. All of these tech companies have, invested in reliance. The more interesting discussion, and I don't think we want to get into it here because I want to get on to your last topic, but is the issue of when Facebook puts together some sort of code saying how people should behave, some sort of code of behavior on their platform, does that somehow turn them into publishers? Or if Facebook does, some sort of, find out more about this news outlet thing, a little tiny bit of a commentary meant to be, quote, fact checking.
The more they act like a publisher.
Yeah.
Right?
Then do they start?
At what point does it cross over and we have to say, okay, no, now you're actually acting like an editor and a publisher?
Right. That's something that we could certainly talk about in the future.
Yeah.
But I was intrigued. And if you saw in the little teaser that I actually posted out there last second, I ain't got program notes today. But I did put a little teaser out there on Facebook. And exactly how did I put it? Because I want to quote you accurately again. You said that this week, not only because, the absurd theater of the State of the Union address, but you said there's been a tug of war over religious insincerity among the politicians this week that you have found notable. You want to talk about it a little bit?
Well, what is astonishing is the childish shouting match that's going on between the president and the Speaker of the House is boiling down to who prays sincerely. The Pelosi said, I treat this all very seriously. I'm not gloating or happy to impeach him. I pray, and I'm very serious and somber about this important constitutional responsibility. And there was a back and forth. Oh yeah, really? Yeah, you Democrats, you're a bunch of secular people who don't believe in religious freedom anyway. So that began the debate. But it really focused with the State of the Union really intensely because Nancy Pelosi came out of it saying that she didn't think that the president is sincere in his religious beliefs. Literally, that his prayers are not sincere, or he just says that he prays. And Trump came right back with the same thing. When he had his meeting in the East Room of the White House yesterday, he said he doesn't think her prayers are sincere. I don't think she prays, and I don't even think she prays.
Okay, so let's go somewhere a little bit with this. Who has won in Iowa? Do we have any idea?
Well, it does appear that it was about, in terms of the caucus is a caucus. And so what you're doing is you're making choices. If I have to choose between this person and that person, if this person's no longer viable, who would I then choose? So, but in terms of the first couple ballots, I guess Bernie Sanders got the most actual votes. So in terms of popular vote, if that has any meaning in this context, Bernie Sanders won. But in terms of the divvying up of the delegates, it was razor thin between, it was 26 point, something and 26 point something. It was like 0.1% difference between Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. They're both going to get about 10 delegates from
Okay.
from what I understand. And Elizabeth Warren came in third, and Joe Biden came in a really disappointing fourth.
Wow.
So it's still a very divided field. And as I understand it, and from the polls, Biden is running like third in most polls in New Hampshire. It looks like Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders are going to do pretty well there, if the
Okay.
polls are any indication. And the Biden may have, if he comes in third or fourth again, he may really have to rethink everything and put a lot of emphasis on getting certain demographic votes in, say, South Carolina, where he
Okay.
could be stronger.
So Buttigieg did not win Iowa, as far as we know. It was this
Well,
neck and neck thing. We'll
yeah,
see.
I mean, 26.
They're doing recounts or
I mean, what do you
something?
mean? Well, no, they got it all in now.
They
But
did get it finally.
But there was someone from the Democratic Party who said the whole thing should be recounted and
Yes.
should be recanvassed and done over, basically. But which tells you what a disaster it was. But they have now reported 100%, they say, of
Okay.
the votes. And if you consider who got the slight edge in terms of the final delegate vote that counts, Buttigieg edged him out by 0.1%.
Now, on Twitter a little while ago, and I don't think I'm going to be able to find it really quickly, so I'm not going to try to find it now. But if you follow, me, Amy Peikoff on Twitter, and you scroll down somewhere, you'll see, because I commented on it. Buttigieg had a tweet to the effect of, "God doesn't belong to any party." So he's on that as well. So you've got.
But he has actually I want to challenge him, because he has actually said that Democrats are more Christian than Republicans in the past. He's actually violated his own. I mean, as good as that sounds, I have quotes from Mayor Pete where he directly says.
I'm not going to say it sounds good. I'm going to say it sounds bad.
Right.
Because basically they're all claiming this mantle, to use a word that was shoved into my mind the other day against my will. They're all claiming this religious mantle, right? But there's one candidate who isn't, as far as I know. Wouldn't that be Sanders?
You really have a good point there. I think Comrade Sanders is not
not religious. I'm just gonna lead you down this path, James. Are you ready?
If you're honeymoon in the Soviet Union, you're not terribly religious.
Last week I argued with you. This week I'm going to lead you down the path. Okay. So if we have all these Republicans and a lot of Democrats now with the, chiming in, and we're more sincere in our religion than you are. Would you vote for a completely avowed atheist over all this garbage?
Well, socialism is its own religion, mysticism, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, it's a question of what your religion is. I mean, you could say that about a lot of environmentalists too. I mean, they've got their own religion.
Yeah, and I mean, Sanders is always tweeting about religion. I mean, the environmentalist religion, he tweets about that often.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and he's got very kind of a mystical mindset, as a lot of socialists do, as secular as he is. Atheism is. So
you would count
avoiding one error.
You would count on a Trump who gives lip service to God and religion, but isn't sincere in it. Would be your choice over a Sanders who's an atheist?
No, I would. That was not very fair, because Trump is, God, he has really embraced the religious right in a much more aggressive way, even than previous Republican presidents.
Well, and Amash commented about the number of statist measures that he discussed in the State of the Union address.
Oh, yeah.
And, he's doing all this, but supposedly he's an opponent of socialism. And of course, you and I know that Trump's opposition to socialism is not based on principle at all.
Right,
it's completely pragmatic. Yeah.
There was something charming about what Trump did. He segued from Venezuelan socialism into proposals by Democrats to take over healthcare. So socialism and healthcare is bad was the segue from Venezuela. So, I mean, I give him a little point there, but my gosh, what is the significant difference? You're absolutely right. Amash is correct to observe there were any number of proposals that were absolutely statist, that were grabbed obviously from the Democrat playbook, that steal the Democrat thunder, that appeal to traditional Democrat voters. Yep. Trump, I think, frustrates Mrs. Pelosi, because, as I say, because I think he invades their traditional territory pretty effectively. Now, just in terms of the religion issue, Trump may not be, his own background may be New York values, as the religious conservatives were worried about during the 2016 campaign, but he sure, in terms of his policies, has embraced the religious right as aggressively as any Republican president has. He spoke at the March for Life in Washington. No president had done a live appearance there before.
So you get the worst of all worlds, as far as I can tell, with him.
Exactly.
He's embracing the religious right and perfectly happy adopting statist measures.
Oh, completely. Completely. He wants to give everyone health insurance, pre-existing.
And everyone thinks he's some Ayn Rand hero.
Exactly. That's the worst of it.
That's the worst. That is the worst part, because he's doing those two things. And then everybody tells me on Twitter, he's some Ayn Rand hero. And who am I to, criticize him? So it's sad. It's really sad. So
it is.
Yeah, I'm leading you down a path. Now, of course, you and I are in California, and who we vote for is actually just academic.
Pretty irrelevant.
So who did you vote for? Tell me who you voted for, because it's so important. It's like, it doesn't matter who I vote for, right? I voted for Gary Johnson in 2016. Why? Because I wanted to vote for a human being. Thank you very much. The bumper sticker, any functional adult 2020.
Any functional adult. Right. It's better than riding in Mickey Mouse or something.
Are you rooting for Buttigieg then?
I don't think I have a candidate. I mean, maybe, in some ways, if Tulsi Gabbard, I guess, was the Democratic nominee, I'd think about voting for her.
Okay.
I don't think Mayor Pete's going to get the nomination, but if he does, I guess I'd think about it. But no. Okay. Well, see, I
read. It's funny. I had a friend the other day who was posting about him and saying, "Gosh, I disagree with a couple things, but a lot of his positions sound really good." And so then I went and read the list that she had said, and I disagreed with almost all of them, or at least, if not on their face, but the way that they're going, there was something about each one of them, but practically, that I disagreed with. I think we've been inured to statism being touted by our politicians. Like we just, so for me, when I look at this, all this is all statist garbage, right? And then the other thing is, maybe he just comes across as a decent human being, like Gary Johnson did, and you're like, oh my God, a breath of fresh air. This is wonderful. I don't know.
I have a meta issue that I always send candidates through. It really doesn't matter so much what they say as whether I believe they believe what they're saying. Or if they're just saying it to get elected, right? And sometimes you can almost hear the PR and the phoniness of it. And you get the impression that the person is saying whatever it is that will get them elected. And Mayor Pete strikes me as such a fellow. Okay. He strikes me as the kind of guy who was very leftist and progressive at the very beginning, because that appeared to be the direction of his party. And then when it looked like, hey, we're looking for a moderate alternative to all these other leftist socialists, and Biden may not be, all there with all of his gaffes, Mayor Pete started moving to the middle, repositioning himself as the moderate candidate, or perhaps as a Biden alternative. Okay. And when someone is willing to do that, when someone in the course of a single campaign is willing to cross and say, oh, no, I'm not so progressive, I'm actually the more moderate Joe Biden
centrist guy. Centrist, they all say.
What the heck does he actually believe? I'm not sure he believes anything. I think he's saying what it takes to get elected. It's not like I'm questioning the sincerity of everything he says, but basically I think that his positions are the result of the strategy to get elected, and not necessarily reflective of what a President Buttigieg would do. Okay. This is certainly true, I think, was true, for example, of Hillary Clinton. One of the tempting things about voting for Hillary Clinton is that I think most of what came out of her mouth was just a convenient lie.
Right. Okay. Well, Robert over here in the YouTube chat says he's an articulate person who would not embarrass the country on the world stage, and you could actually have a conversation with him. And then he also follows up and says that he thinks that he seems to be relatively sincere, but for me,
That's
I don't,
hard to judge.
it is
But as I
sad,
say,
that you don't
I think
have every
I think he
single
puts
candidate
his-
should be someone who's not going to embarrass us on
right.
the world stage.
But I think
Why
a
is it not
willingness to
that?
shift from left to center shows that he's opportunistic.
Let me say something just because it came up here on the YouTube. But so someone says, but what will we call his partner? First blank. First husband. Yeah, why not?
Yeah, just like we would if a woman was elected and had a husband.
Exactly.
I mean, a husband's a husband, right?
So yeah, I have no problem with the fact that he's gay. That's not an issue.
No,
at
in
all.
fact,
that
it's
would almost
yeah.
exactly.
I'm not an identity politics person, but there is something, if you elect Obama and we get the first black president, get it the heck out of the way. If it means so much to people, get it under, our belt and over it.
Yeah.
So that we don't have to care that.
No, so I almost wanted to like him, and then I read this list, and it's just all this status stuff that he's for, and I'm thinking, okay, so this is the one who looks attractive as compared to the other candidates.
And he really
in the field.
does ground it. And, philosophically, I don't know. Again, he's a leftist. So, but he philosophically certainly has repeatedly grounded it in the New Testament, in Christianity, his sincere Christianity. He regards himself as a church-going Christian, and he regards his defense of the welfare state as basically grounded, and environmentalism as grounded in those Christian values.
Well, certainly that's more consistent, yes.
And I just think this whole campaign has been very interesting in watching the Democrats try and wrestle back Christianity from the Republicans. They think, for example, there was that Christianity Today piece that ran a little while back that said impeach and remove Trump. And here you have an evangelical magazine that was founded by Billy Graham saying remove Trump. So a lot of the people in the media and on the left, the Democrats, got very happy and excited. Is there a crack in the evangelical vote support for Trump? I really don't see it. I think the judicial appointments probably forgive any affair, any sexual past that Trump may have had, any kind of personal life offense that Trump gives them is certainly forgiven when he appoints conservative judges off the Federalist list. And
he appointed one that's good and one that I'm not.
Well, from our perspective, yeah. But from the religious conservative perspective, yeah, I think the evangelicals will forgive Trump just about anything in his personal life if he gives them the judges they want. And more than that, he is embracing the philosophy, the spirit of evangelical politics very, very much. In his speeches, Trump himself is getting more explicitly religious.
Fire and brimstone and all of that too, right?
But then so are the Democrats. And I think it's just pushing both sides into a more and more, a tug of war over the religious high ground. And it's become really particularly apparent in just recent weeks.
I told you the story about how my grandmother helped me become an atheist.
I think you did.
Well, I'll repeat it one more time just because
tell everyone else.
So when I was young, we moved from California to Missouri. I was an Army brat, so we lived in Missouri for a year. And then I got to see my grandmother after some period of time living in Missouri. I don't know how long. I was very young. And apparently I had made a habit of getting up earlier than my parents and turning on the TV. And in the middle of Missouri, the thing that I found to watch on TV on a Saturday morning or whatever, early before my parents woke up, was these, fire and brimstone preachers talking about, you do these things and you're going to go to hell and the devil and all, right? And my grandmother came and apparently I didn't do this to my parents, but I had this great bond with her, great relationship. Yeah. And so I went to her and she said I had big wide eyes, and she said, Grandma, I was watching TV and they were talking about the devil. And she said that she bent down and reassured me. And she said, oh, Amy, don't worry. There's no such thing as the devil. And she planted that seed in my mind very early. So then later when I was 11 or 12 and my, peers at school are inviting me to like religious clubs and camps and stuff like this, and I'm exploring a little bit. It's like, God, I don't believe this stuff. I don't, there's no faith in me. I don't have faith, and I never have had, I never did ever since I thought about it. But Well, she didn't mean to do that necessarily, like to extinguish all religious faith in me.
Right.
But she was a lapsed Catholic and she hated all the fire and brimstone. But, so now.
And if she was just trying to prevent you from being traumatized by the idea, I mean, the idea of hell and Satan are kind of abusive in my mind.
She said my eyes were so wide.
Yeah. I mean, we tell little
Scared.
children these terrifying things.
Yeah.
I think it's traumatic.
My grandmother's awesome. I wish you could meet her. It was awesome. Lapsed Catholic. You would have liked that.
Yeah.
In any event, it's the fire and brimstone thing that got me. And you've got your religious leaders doing it. We expect it from them. Unfortunately, we don't expect that from our politicians in the 21st century. And to see both sides, who can, predict doomsday if you vote for the opponent the best, and who can now explicitly claim the religious mantle from which this sort of thinking comes.
Would Jesus have the immigration policy of Trump? Democrats tell us. Trump is seen as a Christian hypocrite because Jesus wouldn't lock up children in cages at the border. Literally. And so if the argument, I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't like Trump's immigration policies.
Sure.
But if we're going to make it over who's more Christian, who's got the more Christian immigration
in the 21st century.
Right.
Are we regressing?
It feels like it. On religious politics, it feels definitely
you have
like
work to do.
Yes, we do. Yeah, absolutely.
And I have work to do to try to preserve encryption somehow. So
Right.
go to legalizeprivacy.org, help me do it. And we're
And
going
go to creatingchrist.com and help me.
And I think we should draw a line and call it a day here. I'm glad that we got on to at least somewhat more personal and semi-pleasant topics after the rest. Well, let's try to come up with positive topics next time. Can we do it?
Well, no, kudos for, yes, let's do that. And kudos to Robert, though.
No, thank you so much for Robert, but wow, this is, I mean, it's good that he thinks at this point now that the prognosis is overall positive.
Yeah.
But there's been a number of missteps that have caused unnecessary suffering with this.
I think we were
hard.
We were a bit kind, but it takes a certain amount of courage just to do what he did. And so
yes,
I'm grateful.
Thank you so much. Okay, so everybody, thank you for tuning in. If you like this, please click like here on YouTube now. All of you who are watching, give us a nice like and help us out here on YouTube. If you like the show, share it with your friends. If you really like the show and you want to see us keep going, come on over to my Patreon, my Subscribe Star, throw a little donation, show some love. Let us know that you want us to go. Give us suggestions as to topics. We're looking for good news for next week. Amy is putting the call out there. Give us some more positive news to focus on for next week. And like I said, I'm going to keep working. He's going to keep working, and we're going to keep, insofar as we are fighting the bad, we can count the good among those actions as well. Okay. So thank you so much, James. And again, next Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern time, live here on YouTube, my channel, Don't Let It Go. So take care, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.